I stream.
Hello and welcome back to In Conversation. We have a former ambassador, although he's been many other things, but I think now the important thing is that he was ambassador to Egypt at a very critical, we met there in fact if you remember, and that is when I interviewed Hosni Mubarak, and Dr. Waiel Awwad, who has just been told that his region cannot have democracy. And he's still sitting here and smiling.
Well, I think you have, it doesn't mean that you mean to say Israel is only having democracy. That's the propaganda they are doing. It's maybe only for the Jewish, not for the Palestinian. So our core issue in the Middle East is the creation of Israel, which have led to such kind of a government around Israel and around the Arab world that we always Israeli-centric, and the conspiracy theory has been looming about.
What you're saying is, because the state of Israel came into being, and to provide security to the state of Israel, we had to create dictatorships all around it so that Israel might be secure. And all these people can be repressed. That is nobody's interest. Is that what you said?
It's not. It's part of the truth of the story, because that is what they have done, and that the mistake of other country, when you pay $2 billion for the Egyptian government to lift up, or 50% goes to the army and 40% to the pocket of the president, and 10% goes to the USA to suppress the anti-American sentiments in Egypt and the pro-American sentiment, then you don't expect to be a democracy anywhere in the Arab world. So now America felt it's a burden on her, it has to be removed, and these Arab countries has to fall, and those moderates supposed to be following the American policy are falling one apart.
Now that that phase is over, Kanwal, and you now have people's power asserting itself, and they are young people, they can be irrational, and they can go to any length. Do you see this a period of anxiety in Israel and for the West in the Middle East?
Certainly. I don't think that they see very clearly what lies ahead. The situation is very unpredictable, and they won't be able to control the flow of events that easily, especially if they get out of control. But there are early signs that they have some kind of a strategy where they will yield some space to the protesting people, but retain the hardcore of the security state, and that is the sense.
We'll come to that, because the earlier news was that Frank Wisner, American ambassador to India too, and who was former ambassador to Egypt, he was sent as a special, a private envoy of Obama's. He met Hosni Mubarak once, apparently, according to New York Times, gave him a tough message, whatever that might mean, but the second time he did not get an audience. So the impression one is getting is that that Mubarak was in a mood of defiance as far as the American calls for early departure were concerned. How do you read the picture, Awwad?
I think there is a kind of a humiliation by the Americans to the President Mubarak. Mubarak is a veteran, is a war veteran. He has really fought the 1973 war. He has brought modern Egypt till the 2000, where his son came into power and brought the elite of the business community into the decision-making of the government when they start stealing public money. Once you start stealing public money, you increase the resentment in the street of Egypt. And there where you have the red line, you shouldn't have crossed. This is the mistake. So Hosni Mubarak, even the opposition, even now the current interim government saying, we want an honorable exit for him. Do not write off Hosni Mubarak so fast. He will stay on at least for the next. If this pressure does not yield, he may stay on for at least a month till he step down, and because he's still at the helm of power. He will not give it easily, nor any Egyptian leader wanted a humiliation for the pride of Arab. Egypt is the pan-Arabism and the pride of Arab. What Hosni Mubarak have done have really made Egypt, sidelined Egypt, and give opportunities to other regional influence powers, non-Arabs, to play the part of Egypt where we wanted, as a Syrian, to be that Egypt should be at the helm of the crisis in the Arab world.
Assad succeeded in having his son installed. Poor Mubarak failed. We won't get into that one. But the other interesting news, Kanwal, is that in opposition, in violation of the Accords of 1978, that there shall be no Egyptian troops in Sharm el-Sheikh. 1,000 troops have been positioned in Sharm el-Sheikh by the Egyptians. And the Israelis have said nothing. The implication of that being read is that President Mubarak has a house in Sharm el-Sheikh, and he may need some security.
Well, there was a review, by the way. There was going to be a review of the security arrangement with Israel, which Israel refused. Secondly, there is no ship, any submarine, any nuclear submarine, any military ship goes from Israel cannot be checked in Suez Canal by the Egyptians. So where your sovereignty of this dealing? So people felt humiliated. He was not doing the agenda of their own people. That is why resentment was so much in the street of Egypt.
So therefore you think I was wrong. This business of 1,000 troops there because there is a home for the president and he may park himself
Well,
there.
the president himself has said in an interview to Christian Amanpour, I think, that he has no intention of becoming an exile, that he is going to die on the soil of Egypt. And some reports have appeared that he may finally settle down in Sharm el-Sheikh. So there may be some connection there. But coming back to your other question, I think President Mubarak will have to leave. It is in everybody's interest, frankly, that he leaves
including his.
Well, his, of course, but I'm talking of the country and the region, that this is done in a stable manner and that Egypt doesn't the situation doesn't become more chaotic than it is, because then the unraveling process will begin and can cause huge problems for regional stability.
Let me bring another thing to the table. The Economist magazine, which knows what goes on inside the heads in Washington and Israel, said in its cover issue, a new war in the Middle East or something. And that was the 7th of January issue. Now this situation, it's the irony of Middle East that now that the situation in Egypt and Tunisia and the rest of the country, we haven't yet talked about Jordan, all of this is opening up. The theme of war recedes, because war means you bring the people out and the people against their own governments who are supposed to be in cahoots with both Israel and Washington.
The irony of what you said, I must add here, that the same people who supported Mubarak, they are the same people the United States is supporting the youth movement in Egypt. So whoever has finished his job now and again will be replaced. The second important point also of our whole region, unfortunately, is that we were neglected as a young generation by our own government, because they are the creamy layer they have created among them. And unless and until these governments realized what is the need of their people, we were easy. America does not need 500,000 soldiers now to go and invade Iraq or Afghanistan or invade any Arab country. They tried this experiment in Iran. It failed. They tried it now in Lebanon, it failed. They're trying it now in Tunisia, it succeeded, and Egypt is going to be succeeded. So they will, this wind of waves, if the popular uprising is maintained and the people got their aspiration, everything is welcome. Any change in the Arab world is welcome change. Everybody wants, but not to hijack
There
it.
is a huge fear, and I am a little worried about, not about the problem, but about the fear of a problem, which I think is exaggerated. Namely, Muslim Brotherhood, fundamentalism is coming. I think that is where, without accommodating in any dictatorship, in a society where there is no politics, the only space for politics is the mosque. And you will have, parties which have that Islamic tag attached to them.
You said it.
And if we are going to be scared and scurrying for cover, look, Islamic ogre is coming, then I'm afraid change will become a little more problematic.
But Saeed, I think that can be nuanced. The problem that you mentioned, for example, didn't exist in Algeria. And yet in free elections, it is the so-called extremists of fundamentalists, or whatever you call them. They came to power, and the military decided that they're not going to accept the election. Similarly, in Lebanon...
I think that's the beginning of the trouble. I think
and
the
in
military
Gaza,
made a mistake.
And then in the Gaza Strip, there is not mosque-based politics. In fact, the Palestinians are very secular. Yeah. The frustrations are elsewhere in that case. Frustrations with Israel, American policy, and these are the only people who can mobilize the frustration and give it a direction, and they have justice on their side.
Because lacking of democratical institution, you give only, as you said it rightly, alternative was only to go to the mosque and pray to God, and then you will be brainwashed there by people who may take you into jihad or take you into extremism.
One final question. Now, the Arab world has declined in our interests. It is not salient anymore.
It's not
that
true.
building shows the aspiration, Nehru's aspiration, the realities are different.
No, Saeed, I won't agree. In fact, there's now a very conscious effort to have a look west policy, just as we have had a successful look east policy. And our relationship with the Gulf, for example, has expanded a great deal. I was quite surprised and happy to hear that the third largest supplier of oil to India today is Iraq. So we are also coming back into Iraq in our own way. With Egypt, yes, there has been a cooling off of relations because Egypt has been cold to us. It has got into a mental mode where there is a sense of rivalry. It opposes us on some of the issues. You are aware of that.
One final comment from you, and then we have to go.
I think the general lines of Indian foreign policy haven't changed toward the Middle East, at least toward the Palestinian issue. It might be because some politicians...
They have not changed?
They have not changed. It is a pragmatic phase, they call, of the foreign policy, which they have to please both the sides. But me as an Arab, I would like to see India as a proactive.
On that positive note, I thought that you would disagree with me. On that note, I think thank you very much, Kanwal. Thank you very much, Awwad. Thank you. And that, see